Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and today we're talking about getting to know your network so that you can figure out when there's malicious traffic. This is something that greatly depends upon your particular unique network. And so what I'm going to be spending my time focusing on today is really helping to figure out what is the typical traffic profile on your network. And there's a lot to figuring that out. Networks vary a lot from organization to organization, and we'll show you how as we go along. But first I want to introduce to you Louise from LogRhythm. And Louise, thanks for making today's real training for free possible. And also, I know you are, a big-time network guy. And in fact, we were just talking about the fact that you've got network monitoring going on even on your home network. So please feel free to jump in and provide extra color commentary and so on as we go along.
I sure will. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and folks, please use the question window as much as you can. I think we're getting a little echo when one of our panelists is not muted. Okay, it just went away. Thanks. So let's see here. Yeah, like I was saying, folks, please use the question window and share as much feedback as you want to. We want to hear everything you got, including ideas. Sometimes some of the best tips come from you folks in the audience, and we're all in this together. So here's the overall agenda. We're going to talk about, first of all, understanding what I call, I guess, the logical topology of your network. Physical topology is one thing. We need to get that. We need to understand it. But Luis, I don't know if you agree, but the physical topology of the network does not really always correspond to what I would call the logical security topology of your network. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to have that and to at least have an idea.
And if you're not sure what we're talking about, of course, I'm going to drill down into that. But then, it's all about, well, what kind of traffic is on this network? Which direction does each type of traffic go? And then there's room to go a lot further than that. Ultimately, what we want to do is identify the well-worn paths on your network. And if we do that, then the unusual traffic will start to stand out with a lot more contrast than before you understand that. So by a well-worn path, what am I talking about? All right. Some of the gimmies that would exist in any network is everything talks to your Active Directory domain controllers. All right, so that's a highly well-worn path. All of your workstations talk to your email server. Then, everybody in the call center is going to be talking to your CRM system, as an example. So if we start to recognize our well-worn paths and we're able to deprioritize that when we're visualizing it, then other things are going to jump out, like some endpoint outside the call center connecting to your second-tier order entry SQL server. In that case, and by second-tier, I mean it's not a client-facing, end-user-facing server. So why is that happening? And so we got lots of other examples like that as we go along, and kind of a systematic way to identify those well-worn paths. Because I think the important thing to get across with my concept on well-worn paths is, and I'm interested in your comments on this, Louise, is that not every endpoint communicates with every other endpoint on the network. Even if you aren't doing any segmentation, if you have a good enough analysis going on, you're going to see that given endpoints typically communicate with a subset of the other IP addresses on your network.
That is correct, and part of our NDR solution includes some built-in analytics that help you show when there's new or unusual traffic volume between hosts that hasn't been observed before.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. But I'm also going to talk about how to go beyond those well-worn paths and look inside the application traffic, because the bad guys can and do hide their communication inside well-worn paths like HTTPS outbound to the internet. Some other important things to look at is web application gateways, and speaking of HTTPS, SSL decryption. So let's go. Where do you start? Well, the first thing you've got to understand is your network's full address space, and that includes your partners and virtual networks and like infrastructure as a service. It's getting more and more common for you to set up virtual machines in the cloud and other, they may not even be virtual machines, they're just service endpoints in the cloud that are directly routable from your internal network. And so that then becomes, these virtual networks in the cloud, they're not public IP addresses, they're private IP addresses, and they're only reachable, hopefully, from your network. And so they really become an extension of your network. And then, of course, there's connections to other partners as well. So what is your network's full address space? Now, I've only got one slide devoted to this, but I recently did a webinar on understanding your full network's attack surface. And we kind of tried to provide a systematic way to identify your full network and the complete IP address space of that network. It's a lot more than what you might think. But assuming we've done that, then how is our address space broken up? Well, the important point is that the more segmented your network is, the better. And now, why do I say that? Well, segmented, first of all, is just good. Segmentation is just good for security anyway, right? Because to this day, most corporate networks are way, way, way too much the concept of a hard shell and a soft GUI inside. And really, networks should be compartmentalized, at least with rules that segment traffic based upon what we know off the hip, just as one example, your virtualization infrastructure and your virtualization fabric shouldn't be reachable by your average endpoint out on the rest of your network. That should only be reachable by administrators that actually do the care and feeding of your virtualization fabric. But that's just one example. There's lots and lots more. PCI networks and so on need to be segmented. Okay, but I think most folks are in a situation where they have far less segmentation than what would be good for security. And when I say segmentation, I mean we have hard rules with an internal firewall, even if it's just a router, that limits traffic between segments on your network. Okay, so even if you have little to no hard segmentation, what if we at least have our IP address assignment well organized so that when we see an IP address, we know that it's more than just a place that packets can be routed to on your internal network, but we have a better idea of what, maybe what type of server, what type of device it is, and so on. There's different ways to organize IP address assignment that I'll talk about, but the more statements that we can make about a given IP address, then the better we're going to be able to break our network up into what I call areas. Maybe we could even call these security areas. I'm purposefully using a different term than zone or segment or subnet because they don't, it's not definitely a one-to-one correspondency. So what do I mean by areas? Here's a few. Certainly a segment behind an internal firewall, certainly subnets, microsegments. So if you're doing any kind of microsegmentation, those would be areas. But other less well-defined things, at least what's our DHCP range that we dynamically assign IP addresses out of? That's probably the most fundamental one. When you look at an IP address, you should be able to right away know, is this a static IP address or is it from our DHCP range? Do you have DHCP reservations, and how heavily do you use those? In fact, I wish I would have done a poll on that. I might throw together a few polls later. How well organized is your static address space? I'd love to get feedback from the audience, but you talk to lots of customers. Louise, how well organized would you say static IP address spaces are in terms of, I can look at that static IP address and determine, is this a printer, is it a server, is it a virtualization server, or what?
I would love to say that most of my customers have a very well-defined and easy to understand IP addressing scheme. The truth of the matter is that perhaps a few guys on the network team know that, and usually the security guys don't have an idea, but it is, of course, it's very important, very critical.
Yeah, because the more we can say about an IP address, just based upon its address, then the easier it's going to then be to identify the well-worn paths on the network. Sandu asks, do you think on a segmented network it's necessary to have DHCP audit logs? If yes, why? Yeah, definitely, Sandu, because let's just say that you have a compromised workstation. It has a DHCP address of yada yada at this point. We need to be able to go back, and when we're investigating what are all of the systems that IP address, that system talked to, then we need to know what IP address it had at those times. So at least for that reason alone, you want your DHCP logs for sure. Okay. So hopefully we can at least distinguish servers and workstations. But hopefully we would be able to also, from the IP address, say this is an IoT device. This is a network device in terms of a router or a wireless access point. These are my printers. These are my phones. If you have industrial, ICS-ICA means industrial control systems, industrial control automation, or SCADA. I mean, hopefully, for absolute sure, you can identify those. If you've got retail systems or other systems dealing with credit cards, hopefully from the IP address, we can identify those as well. And so that would mean that if you have a bunch of retail locations and you've got a physical network at each one of those stores, hopefully you've got different IP addresses distinguishable for your cash registers as you do for the HVAC system or security cameras or stuff like that at that network. I'd love to get an idea from you folks on how well you feel you could distinguish this from your IP addresses. Just if you've got some thoughts to share on that, please throw it into the question window. So the rest of what we talk about will largely depend, I guess, on the answers to this question right here. But the next question to ask is, I want to talk about direction. Yeah, there's a couple points that I wanted to talk about. Just first of all, just with regard to what direction your traffic is flowing. And before we even drill down into east-west. And that is just with regard to this is very fundamental, and that is, oh, by the way, with direction, in case anyone is not familiar with this, when we talk about north-south, we mean traffic going out to the internet and coming back in. Or, Louise, do you usually group in anything like even to a business partner or something else as north-south as well?
Yeah, that is considered, north-south traffic because it is having to go outbound through your firewall, if you will. If there was, I guess you could say, if it was a B2B VPN, then perhaps it would classify that as a lateral based on what the netmon probe sees.
Yeah, well, Doug says, well, then call it ingress-egress. Well, that's just not what is done in the industry nowadays. It's called north-south, and east-west is traffic between devices, endpoints, servers, or whatever on your quote-unquote internal or corporate network. And this is where we get into physical topology versus logical topology, because if we are talking about traffic between our on-prem network and a virtual network up in the cloud, and that virtual network is just limited to our express route or VPN connection, then I view that as part of our security internal IP address space, and really I would kind of view that as east-west. But from a physical point of view, you'd view it as north-south.
And Randy, to expand a little bit on, I think Waldis is asking this or saying that it's more important to have a diagram, which I totally agree. However, how many of us know very diligent organizations that actually have updated network diagrams? In the NDR solution, one of the big things that we talk about, or I should say that I'm a stickler for, is what we call the concept of entities. And you can think of entities as a way to segment your organization in whatever way works for you and your team. So that means if you have a multinational corporation and you have locations all over the world and you want to set up your entities to mirror those locations, including the networks that they're in, the subnet ranges, the hosts that belong to those, you can absolutely do that. And you'll see when I present later on why that's important, because it goes exactly to what we're talking about here. How many people can identify what system is this just based on IP address, unless they've been working at the company for 30 years and been the same network admin for 30 years?
Yeah. A couple points that people are making. Most folks are saying that they have their corporate guest and DMZ networks segmented from each other, and that's about it. And that's what I find. The corporate network proper is usually just soft and gooey on the inside. Hey, one other thing that is worth talking about is the north, south, east, west thing can also be valuable to look at in the context of a given zone or segment or subnet of your network. So let's say we have a semi-isolated or segmented network for our virtualization fabric. North-south in that case would be, you could talk about it in terms of connections into and out of your virtualization fabric segment, right? But east-west would be communication between like the hypervisor hosts and the hypervisor management system, all within that. So north, south, east, west really depends upon the context or scope of the network that you're talking about. But I also want you to think about it in terms of security zones and not, strictly speaking, the flow of your packet, because your physical network segments and your physical topology is not a perfectly lined up overlay to your security your logical security topology of your network. I'm not liking exactly the order of my slides here. I'm going to, well, I guess we'll follow them. Let's just stick with what I've got. My mind started going a different direction here as I got into this, but let's just talk about east-west. So we're not even talking about going outside our network because, and I think this is really an important place to start because, and this is why I put it first, I think there's too much focus on north-south traffic. You know, finding data exfiltration, finding connections to command and control servers. Yeah, that's important, absolutely, and we absolutely want to look at it. But so oftentimes in security, we get hyper-focused on one thing and let other things slide. And I actually believe that some of our best opportunities to catch today's types of persistent attacks is to look at our our east-west traffic, because there's never, I can't think of a recent vulnerability that I've investigated or researched, not vulnerability, incident or breach that I've researched that was limited to a single endpoint. There's always lateral movement, and to me, I think that can tend to be far more noisy than the north-south traffic associated with a bad guy. So think about the traffic that a bad guy has to generate once he's compromised one of the endpoints on your network, like with a phishing email. There's going to be north-south. That's where he's doing command and control and finally maybe exfiltrating data. But he's got to also do east-west in order to laterally move between systems to gain more credentials, you know, like past the hash and so on, but also to just finally get to the system that has the data that he wants. So let's start this conversation with our east-west traffic. What generalizations can you make about appropriate, inappropriate flows? Well, first of all, we can say that workstations, if this is a typical corporate network, workstations connect to servers. And typically workstations don't connect to other workstations unless we're doing some peer-to-peer stuff, but we should be able to identify that. So Louise, you know, how many companies have to deal with legitimate workstation-to-workstation connections, but are those limited to a few specific applications that we can filter out?
I can't say that a whole lot of them. We do get a few, but very few of the workstation-to-workstation traffic. I'd say that file sharing is probably, you know, the somewhat allowed, I want to say, because not every organization allows it. So other than that, there really is hardly any need to have things like SSH or P2P stuff like you're saying, or even IRC channels, things of that nature. So now for certain departments, like they said there in the chat or in the questions, you know, dev is a different entity all of its own, and for there, this yeah, you're going to see a lot of things that you normally don't see in what you call the corporate traffic, your soft and GUI.
Okay, so that's just good confirmation, yet the bad guys will definitely try to jump from workstation to workstation. What about this though? Most servers don't connect to workstations. So are there exceptions? There's exceptions to all of these. So the key exceptions with those would be systems management servers, log collection appliances, vulnerability scanners, and patch management systems. All of those typically will initiate connections into workstations. But once we rub those out, you know, filter those exceptions out, then that's going to be really interesting if we suddenly see it. what about printers and IoT devices? Do they typically initiate east-west connections? That's, of course, going to depend on your network, but and that's the whole point of this, is you have to get to know your network, but we're trying to provide you with things that you can start looking for, or to shake loose other ideas in what you know about your network, because the more generalizations that you can draw about what is appropriate and inappropriate flows allows us to start identifying our well-worn paths. Any other examples that come to your mind that you'd want to share here, Louise? And it's okay if you hadn't thought, none had occurred to you.
No, I was going to say the same thing you did, that, there's tools like Tanium and, endpoint management tools and for log collection, and you're absolutely correct. For that, you will see some of that traffic, and that's to be expected. However, and I'll show this later on, there is a SMB traffic can hide some things laterally that can be exploited quite a bit. And we all know this because you are the ultimate Windows security guy, so I'm sure you you can talk a whole lot better about that than me.
Okay, well, if you have any other ideas about key generalizations that you can make about a typical corporate network, great. But then if you're a hospital, there's all kinds of other generalizations you're going to be able to make. If you are a manufacturer and you've got a factory floor, likewise, same thing. If you're a bank, oh my goodness, there's all kinds of generalizations that you could make there, because you have such a homogeneous set of different work staff roles, and what do people do in branches, and the endpoints behind the teller counter, what do they connect to as opposed to the personal banking representatives out on the floor, and then people working at the various processing centers of a bank. There's wonderful opportunities for generalization and segmentation there. And I guess just the thing that is key to get here is, we're not saying that you have to do segmentation. We're saying you just have to be able to recognize through IP address assignment. So before you ever get to segmentation, you need to have a well-organized static IP address space. And not just that, but even your DHCP address space, the more organized that is, the better.
Randy, I'll add here real quick that, a very possible scenario in EastWest Traffic is, you may have a dev environment, dev and QA, that is logically segmented, and, you may observe some traffic from, let's call it, general population segment attempting to enter that area in the dev and QA, which could be indicative of one or two things. It doesn't necessarily have to be malicious, but it could be, a dev person who's being too lazy to go over there into that section and do it himself, or it is something that is banging at the door and trying to get in. Now, with network NDR, you can go ahead and tell when things like that are happening, or you can see, and like you said, be able to determine, hey, what kind of looks anomalous and doesn't look anomalous.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting, Fred and Eddie also mentioned dev environments. Frank says in their environment, the dev server's static only, and they're on a different subnet. Eddie says development servers should not talk to production servers. So again, we've got more generalizations about what's right and what's wrong that is just key to helping us zero in on the well-worn paths and what's normal, what's good, and what isn't. To what degree can we distinguish server types? So I would love it if we could, when we're looking at traffic that we've captured off the network or analyzing, if we could tell, okay, this is a server, but it's not just a server. This is a server that is end user facing, or what we call a first tier server. So that would be like a the web application host, and I mean like a web application on your internal network, like your CRM system or SAP or something like that. And then what about second-tier servers? So those would be like the database server. Chances are with larger environments, like even with SharePoint, if you're accessing if you have a SharePoint farm, you've got a number of front-end servers, and then you have database servers and some others. So with normal SharePoint access, the end user never talks to the database server, to the SQL server. So that's a second-tier server, and if we can distinguish that on the network, then as soon as we see connections coming into that SQL server from our average general populace, as Louise referred to it, then that's an issue. And the interesting thing here is I'm talking about doing this proactively and I guess deterministically, but with good network analysis software like NDR from LogRhythm and whatnot, there's also the option to do this empirically. And as long as IP addresses are static, then we've got some interesting options there. So just because you don't have a well-organized IP address space where you assign IP addresses carefully to help distinguish what types of devices they are, okay, that may preclude you doing a lot of what I'm talking about in a deterministic way, but empirical is still an option, and we'll talk about that more as we go along. What kind of systems, what kind of servers reach out into workstations? I think I might have covered that earlier, but the ones that I'm most familiar with are your patch management servers, vulnerability scanners, systems management servers, and log collection if you're doing pull log collection. There's some other servers that are infrastructure and what I'd call global app servers that everybody talks to. And that's going to be, those are going to be quite a bit more difficult to detect malicious traffic to and from. And those are your domain controllers, your email servers, your DNS servers, your file servers, and log collection. But again, the next thing that we're going to do is get down to the application protocol level, and so we still have some options there. Oh, thanks, Frank. Frank points out that asset management servers like Landsweeper and whatnot would also come under the heading of endpoint scanning servers. What about workstation types? Man, if we could make these and other distinctions, this would be tremendous. So do you do hoteling with cubicles? I would want to know my network ports devoted to hoteling. When you're looking at an IP address on your network, can you tell, is this a wireless client or a wired client? And then as far as user types, if there's one distinction that we could make with workstations is this the workstation of a privileged user or an end user? And that should be getting easier and easier in organizations because the industry has realized, or at least the InfoSec world, the CyberSec world has recognized that we have got to dedicate we've got to dedicate workstations to privileged access because of pass-the-hash and other risks, other credential harvesting attacks like that. If we're going to do some admin work, that needs to be on a SAW, on a secure administrative workstation. So if we can at least make that distinction, do you realize what that's going to be able to do for us? If you look at lateral movement from the bad guys jumping from one system to another, most of that lateral movement is by some type of administrative protocol, whether it's RDP, Secure Shell, or WMI, or WinRM. And so if we can say, well, this is an admin workstation and we expect it, or no, wait a second. Why is an HR system, an HR employee's workstation reaching out with RDP to get into the order entry SQL server? So that is an awesome generalization if you can make that between your workstation types. Michael says, what do you mean by hoteling? That's where you just have a floor of cubicles, and it's a company where most people work from home, or you have a lot of business travelers and who are coming in from other campuses and regions, and so you just have a floor or a room of cubicles, and somebody just walks into one that is unoccupied, and they log on to the phone and they plug their laptop in, or they log on at that workstation with those credentials, and that's their cubicle for the day. That's what hoteling is. But that's important to know when you're looking at an IP address, because you're not going to be able to make many, if any, assumptions about the role of that user and what their normal access would be. So how can you distinguish an admin workstation from an end user workstation? Well, first of all, can we assign specific subnets to where IT staff set? And I'd love to hear from you folks. Is that already in your network? Is that a distinction you can already make? But also, how about this? A separate Wi-Fi service set identifier, your SSID, for privileged users. All right, if that's too much, what about DHCP reservations for secure administrative workstations? So Bob, the admin, has a laptop that he walks around with. He may connect from wherever, but for each subnet, can we, would it be possible to do some DHCP reservations for such workstations? That would be maybe a lot of work, but I'm just throwing out ideas for how to do this. And it of course, is going to vary from organization to organization, which is more practical. But you might also be able to take advantage of some other things. A lot of organizations put their systems that administrators work on behind a internal firewall and an internal VPN server. And so, sure, I can access my SharePoint server for normal end user access over HTTP, HTTPS, but I can't directly RDP into that system. I have to VPN internally to a VPN server on my internal network, which then that allows me to get into RDP on that at the operating system level. So if you're an organization that does that, then it now becomes a lot easier to identify admin workstations wherever they are, whatever IP address they have, because they are a VPN client of this internal VPN server. But a lot of you also have privileged session management proxy servers, where whatever system it is that you are remoting into, whether it's Secure Shell or RDP, you go through this one central PSM appliance or cluster. So again, anybody who's a client of that system, we can assume that's an administrative, secure administrative workstation, and then start recognizing when other folks are not at a SAW, and yet they're trying to do something privileged. Eddie says our IT admin users are forced to go through jump boxes to get to servers or PAM. So yeah, you should be able to take advantage of that. Frank asked me, so are you promoting the use of reservations for admin privileged systems? Yeah, if at all possible. for sure. Doug says, so then you need to start with 1, short lists of known good, 2, identify the general network community, and find traffic that is other than non-whitelisted. Well, you'll see. Hang in there, Doug. We'll talk about that more. But Louise, go ahead.
All right, so yeah, I was gonna address a little bit what Doug said, and yeah, within the NDR platform, you have the ability to set up a whitelist, which is what I would do for the scenario that Randy described about the front-end servers being the only ones who talk to the back-end servers. You could set up a whitelist with a rule that's always watching that says, hey, when you see any connection attempts that is not from these whitelisted front-end servers, why not? Then send me an alert in real time. So yeah, there is a lot of truth that you have to have and know the context of your network. Fortunately, there's no magic bullet as of yet that can magically or automagically figure it all out for you.
Let's talk about other end users. Can we break them down at all? So does your organization have any wide or large homogeneous set of users with very finite usage patterns? So the first thing I always think of is a call center. Usually those folks are going to have 1 to 3 main applications that they talk to: a CRM system, an order entry system, and maybe a service provisioning system. And then they're going to have the usual HR stuff, access to the main intranet server, email, and so on. But they're going to have a very, very different traffic profile compared to your average knowledge worker and manager that's on all kinds of different projects and collaborates with people all over the organization. And so can we identify those folks by IP address? If they're on a certain floor, hopefully we've got a subnet that's just devoted to them. Because if their endpoint gets compromised, it's the traffic that bad guy generates is going to stand out as being so different than what we can easily define as normal for that class of users. And nobody's going to be able to do this perfectly, but looking for at least those sets of IP addresses that you can and identifying them as a certain class is going to help tremendously.
And Randy, I'll add a little bit of color to that if I may. I have a customer, an actual customer who had a similar situation like that, where we were seeing some files being blocked by Palo Alto, and then we looked at the data in NDR, and when we started looking at it, the person who works there and was working with me said, wait a second, these are all call support people, and they investigated, and it turns out it was just a remote control file that they use that is approved, that was being sent to the user to help them out. However, it was still an interesting thing to look at because, you know, when we looked at NDR, we're like, okay, this looks a little strange. Let's take a look at it. So absolutely, it's very important to have somewhat of an idea of, you know, that support people, for example, are going to have limited ability to go around your network or do certain things around your network.
That's a great point. I'm glad you shared that. Okay, so let's go beyond just IP address and let's start talking about protocols and destination ports. So, you know, you can call it protocol, you can call it application, but in terms of literal metadata on a packet, it's the destination port usually. So let's just start off with one thing. What are all of the destination ports that we observe in our traffic from whatever all of our taps are? And then let's start figuring out which of those destination ports can we assign protocols and applications to. Again, there's always going to be exceptions. There's applications that use random ports, and just like FTP is one example, the classic FTP protocol. And the good news is with some of those we can lock that down more, especially with WMI, which I'll talk about in a second. But just what are all the protocols that we see anywhere on our network? Let's start with that and make sure we can link those to the appropriate applications where possible. Of course, HTTPS is becoming the general protocol for everything nowadays, at least everything that goes out on the internet. But that's not true internally on the internal network. There's still a lot of different protocols, and this can be very important, very useful to hone in on, especially with regard to associating certain protocols with privileged access. You will need to identify sources of dynamic destination ports so that you're not always setting off alarms because of those. Frank has an interesting point here. I kind of like this. Technically, it's security through obscurity, but I'm going to allow it because sometimes, frankly, security through obscurity can be very useful, especially when we're not relying on it as a preventive control, but a way to force the bad guys to make more noise or to trick the bad guys into making more noise. So here's, I think, the point with regard to what Frank is saying in the context of detecting malicious traffic. If we stop using port 3389, and if we say, all right, for our organization, we're going to configure every system that should accept remote desktop connections to use a custom port that we decide. It's 20,001 or something like that. And we can do that through group policy, make sure every system does that. Okay, now our insiders are going to know that. So if our insider decides to go malicious, we're not going to see that. He's going to immediately use that IP address, and that port number. And it's not a preventive control because you can figure out by port scanning ports that are open. But how about for detective controls? If we see any attempts to connect to a system on port 3389, that is the default port for RDP, then what does that mean? It means either we have a system that is not configured right with our custom port, or it means that we have an administrator that has forgotten, or it means that we have a bad guy who is not aware of this policy, and that's a safe assumption. Your average bad guy that compromises a server is likely going to assume that 3389 is the port that you connect on. So I love that idea. That's great. Threat actors or users not paying attention. Sure. And, this would be information that it would be better not to just post on the intranet, right? This would be stuff, I really think, especially within the IT department, there needs to be a side channel for communicating important security data. And even with your end users, there's ways that you would want to be able to communicate information that is a little more difficult for the bad guys to come across. But yeah, that's a really cool idea. You could do that with Secure Shell too. Okay, but there's other ports associated with privileged access besides RDP and Secure Shell. Do you use internal VPNs? Do you have PSM portals, privileged session management portals? A lot of times those are used the standard ports for RDP or Secure Shell, but you may be able to change that, probably likely can. But here's the other two big ones that the bad guys use nowadays for lateral movement, and that's WMI and WinRM. Now, WMI, by default, is just going to use the same IP address that file serving does. Port, I think it's 135 and port 445, SMB. So there's no way then to distinguish, at least from the packet header data, when someone is accessing a file share or when they're trying to get into that system via WMI. But guess what? You can configure Windows to only listen on port 24158. And, oh, by the way, WMI will also, I think after the connection is established, use a dynamic port. But you can overcome all of that. Just do a search on this script, set WMI single port.ps1. It's not a built-in PowerShell command, but it's a script you can find from Microsoft out there. By default, it's going to set WMI to a single port, 24158. Bam. Now, with our network monitoring technology, we can identify when there's WMI connections. And those should oftentimes be very predictable and quantifiable. What is an appropriate WMI connection between two endpoints and what isn't. The same goes for for WinRM, but thankfully with WinRM, those are standard ports 5985, or if you're using SSL 5986. Just be aware that Windows Event Forwarding also goes over WinRM, and so your Windows event collectors would see inbound to those addresses, and if you're using pull, you would see outbound from those Windows event collectors to the endpoints that are doing that. So now, can we at least correlate destination ports to direction? Are there certain? There's certainly going to be certain ports or protocols that are common to northbound traffic, and there should be probably very limited southbound traffic at all. That is, coming from the internet going into your general populous corporate LAN segments. And then same with east to west. Can we say which ports are normally seen, which protocols are normally seen for east-west traffic? But in general, that is just far too general. We've got to drill down into that east-west traffic more, which is something we've already talked about. But can you go even further with especially your corporate network and all of your internal segments or areas that we identified before, and say for a given protocol, which areas receive traffic to this destination port, which areas send traffic to this destination port? Let me give you a couple examples. Your IT staff, whatever subnet corresponds to their workstations, okay, you should see that segment initiating a lot of outbound connections to RDP or Secure Shell. But your call center folks, probably not, right? Likewise, your subnets associated with your workstations should not be seeing a lot of inbound RDP or Secure Shell, probably. But of course, knowing your network and its areas, you're going to be able to come up with more examples of those. But what you've done now, once you identify things down to the destination port and acceptable source IP addresses and acceptable destination IP addresses, you've now identified your well-worn paths, and start looking for traffic that falls outside those paths. And by the way, well-worn doesn't necessarily mean a high volume of packets. It just means known appropriate. But don't forget that malicious traffic can hide in your well-worn paths. Here's just a couple examples. File server traffic. That could just, file server traffic that looks normal could in fact be a compromised endpoint spreading via infected documents that it puts out on file shares. Or it could be a compromised endpoint vacuuming up confidential data from files on some share. DNS queries can actually have data exfiltration in them or command and control. And of course, SSL is increasingly used by the bad guys. So that means, and this is something that is more on Louise's level, is looking at stuff beyond just source, destination, IP addresses, and port number, and that's looking at packet cadence, average packet size, data volume, ratios of for this particular application or protocol, do I see more data coming in or going out? So as an example, most web browsing traffic, you're sending far less data than what the web browser is downloading. That's just one quick example. And so that's data volume, but also data volume ratio between sender and receiver. And then you can get protocol specific, like with DNS queries, we need to be watching which commands are going into those DNS queries. There are some commands that legitimate users really never use, but have been very useful for bad guys for command and control and data exfiltration. One of my last things I want to get out is just be aware of and identify cloud gateways, web application gateways. It's increasingly common for various, especially systems management, web applications or cloud services to provide you with a hard or physical appliance that you stand up on your internal network, and that then gives that web application or service the ability to reach into your network and do things. We need to be aware of those, and we need to know what is normal traffic from that thing and what isn't, because if your cloud vendor gets compromised, the bad guy now has a full and unfettered wormhole right into your network. Well, the bottom line is, we got to understand our network, and not just from a physical point of view, but also the logical security topology of the network. And don't make assumptions about physical east-west, north-west, or sorry, north-south traffic. So which applications, protocols do I have on my network? What direction do they usually go? But better than that, looking at my east-west traffic especially, can I identify the well-worn paths and recognize stuff that's not fitting that path? But you can only go so far if you're trying to do this deterministically. And I think that's just one of the neat value points that your technology provides, Louise, with NDR, and that is the ability to empirically look at your data to figure out what are those well-worn paths and what's normal for this particular endpoint.
So like Randy was saying, all of these, and we talked about a lot of different things that you can get from your network. And I'll go through, I got a couple of slides here that I'll go over real quick, and I'll go ahead and show you those slides in just a second here, that I got to make sure that I'm showing the PowerPoint. There we go.
Yeah, you look good.
All right, so I'm a sales engineer for up here in the Northeast. I cover Manhattan, been around for quite some time. NDR is a relatively new product offering from LogRhythm. It combines network monitor sensors along with our technology platform. And basically, we are very big fans. I'm a very big fan of NDR and network monitor because the network essentially doesn't lie. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hide things well, because there's many layers of hiding things with things like encryption, and if you don't know a whole lot of networking intimately, then you may not know exactly what you're looking at. Case in point, if you use other tools for capturing packets like Wireshark and stuff, it's a fantastic tool, but I don't know about you guys. Most of the time I look at it and I just kind of go, huh? So with NDR, you'll see, I'm going to show you a couple things. I'm going to show you the orchestration and response piece of it via some pre-canned alarms that I've been running while Randy was talking. I will show you what the analyzed dashboards look like, so that if you're an analyst and you want to take a look at things as, which one of my, remember how I talked about entities earlier and said that however you segment your organization and make sense to you, that's a really good way to visualize things. And I'm also going to show how I'm going to log into to 2 network sensors. One of those, full disclosure, is at my home, and the other one is the demo environment we have at LogRhythm. And the reason I'm doing that is because the demo environment in LogRhythm would be very similar to what you would call back office type of traffic, and the one here, my home, is more akin to your what I call Gen Pop, right? So you're going to see more interesting things, but that's so that you guys can get a good overview, both time permitting, of course. So we know that in order to surface threats through centralized machine-based analysis of network traffics, we have indicators of compromise that are known, and then we have some procedures, and then we fall into the unknown category with behavioral profiling, right? We have the ability to do that within NDR and our product. So we have to you have to have some sort of context of your business and your network. That's just a given, right? You can't expect any given solution to just automatically figure it all out. The good thing is that we're very good at making things pretty powerful and very simple for the users to understand. So LogRhythm NDR combines detection via the use of network sensors, what we call our network monitors, investigation through the use of our LogRhythm platform, and that includes dashboards, alarms, things of that nature, and response by the use of our smart responses. I'll show you a sampling of smart responses that we have that are available. I tried, actually I had a really neat one working in my environment yesterday, and I upgraded part of the script, and I broke it, but it still shows that it was trying to do its thing, so you will see that what smart response capabilities are available. All right, so what can you do with it? Well, NDR is very good at helping you see those things, what we call low and slow data leaks, right? I'll show you in the dashboards how we do that, and a very easy way of possibly taking a look at those things. Compromised server use and lateral movement, we've been talking a lot about that, and I'll also be able to show you some of that in the network monitor probe itself. Desktop compromise by custom malware, I have a PCAP that I run of WannaCry, in which we go ahead and we detect the indicators of WannaCry on the network, and we go ahead and generate an alarm and have some automation behind it. So I'll show you guys that. Privileged user recon with the internal network. I tried to set this one up, didn't have time to do it. And SCADA attacks, by the way, for those who do not know, we do have support for over 19 SCADA types of protocols within the product. So it's not just your IP-based stuff. We also do SCADA or SCADA detection and the ability to tell what traffic that is. For those who don't know the specs of our product, which I assume are a few of you, we currently detect over 3,474 different applications from layer 2 through layer 7 in our NetMon sensors. And we do full packet captures. And when I mean full packet captures, is we're not just capturing the first 64 kilobyte headers, we're actually doing the full session captures on the product. One thing we don't do is we're not in the business of SSL decryption. However, there are some fantastic tools out there, and I am seeing a lot more of my customers, including banks and other institutions, that are employing SSL decryption and then sending the data down to us. All right, so let's get into the fun stuff, if we will. Let me see if we have any questions over here.
I'll help you watch the questions
Sure.
too. Don't worry about it too much, Luis.
All right, so now let me go ahead and share my web browser. All right, so like I said, I have two environments here, and this one here is the one I'm going to begin with, is my home environment. believe it or not, I have quite a few number of devices that are hooked up to our network, and no, I did not know just how many I had until I installed Network Monitor. It's a little scary to be honest, and thank God that the ISP doesn't do any sort of throttling after a certain amount of gigabytes, because between all the devices we have, we blow through gigabytes and gigabytes of data pretty easily. So this one is my home environment here, and this one over here is our network environment, if you will, our demo environment. So consider this one to be a little bit more of your back office traffic, what you should be seeing. Now, we talked about entities, and here's the widget that I was talking to you about. If you have your entity set up this way, you can see, hey, about how much traffic or events we're seeing for each one of those entities. And if you wanted to see, hey, how many of these DNS queries belong to LRSDE, when you click on this, it'll break it down for you, and I can quickly go ahead and break it down again and see now we're filtering by that entity and DNS queries. And if you want to go ahead and take a quick look at the data in regular form, you'll see it here. Now notice that this is all from our network monitor, right? So you can highlight any one of these rules and you'll see information here that you can go ahead and download and take a look and see, hey, we see that this is DNS traffic, long session, debug. If it had a query, we would have that query in the subject. This one didn't necessarily have one of those. So very easy to see. But the reason I'm showing you this is because, again, we have very powerful software and product here, and we try to make it easy. So why all these widgets? Remember the low and slow on that slide that I just showed you? So the reason I have a bottom application and a top application corresponds to that, if you think about it in the way that we think of things, right? Bottom application, low and slow, this is where we would see those things. Hey, we got some BitTorrent activity over here. We shouldn't probably be seeing that. If I was only looking at top, hey, what's the top applications that we see on the wire, I may miss that, you know, unless I go way down here. But by having both widgets, I can quickly just go ahead and pivot in it and say, hey, show me BitTorrent, who did it, where did it go? We see that it was this host, and this this was the origin host who originated the activity going to that impacted host. Now, we don't have host names and all that because that's from a PCAP that we keep running, so it's a 10 dot. Our network doesn't have a 10 dot, but for demonstration purposes, you kind of get the idea, right? You can see which entity it came from. If you wanted to take a look at the logs, you can take a look at that real quick in here. The more interesting side of things, this is what we would call general population traffic, NDR, looking at your traffic. Now, here we have, look at all the typical types of things that we would see. We have an iPhone, we have a MacBook Pro, we have a TV that's even communicating. It's like, what? A TV that's communicating? Absolutely. If you take a look that, you know, it's requesting DHCP, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and it's DHCP that it's requesting, right? And look at this. Because I'm capturing packets, if I wanted to, I can go ahead and download this PCAP from here, and by clicking on that, I can pull that PCAP for further analysis in whatever network monitor like tool, whether it was Wireshark or whatever. I go ahead and click on that, and I'm able to download that PCAP. So this is the kind of stuff that makes it very easy to see what's going on in your network, what's traversing on it, and what things you should be paying attention to. Again, if this top enterprise, Zima Enterprise over here is your corporate network, and then the Stanford is a remote location, and you want to see, hey, what's going on with in terms of network traffic for the Stanford remote location, it's as simple as that. And now you can see, you know, what applications are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of DHCP. We're seeing some UDP stuff. We're seeing, you know, these different devices communicating. So again, very simple to take a look at all sorts of data within NDR. Now I'm going to switch over. I'm going to show you some of those alarms that we had talked about, the WannaCry alarm. And mind you, this is not all about, you don't have to just create alarms for security. stuff. You can also create alarms for abuses, let's call it, right? Let's call it abuse of the boss band, right? So if you are on let's take the example that Randy talked about, a customer service center, right? They are usually pretty limited by what they're allowed to do. And you could do such things as have an alarm alert you if we notice something as simple as Spotify usage, right? That exceeds a certain amount. And it can tell you right away, hey, in this segment here, we have someone who's using Spotify. Perhaps you should go talk to them, right? Now, it's not a very high risk alarm because maybe it is something that you allow. However, if it is something that you're trying to curb or curtail because perhaps you've noticed that your Gen Pop or the customer service reps are eating up too much of your bandwidth, this is something that you can react to right away. And this goes to the see down here where it says smart response failed. I had created this alarm with a smart response to go ahead and open up a case right away and add the information to it. And I'm scrolling down here on the right-hand side, and you can see as I get to that section that, hey, it's create a new case, right? So this would have launched a case and allowed me to go ahead and add the information on there, put the relevant details, perhaps collaborate with someone, and if it really was something bad, I could even escalate that to a case. Now, like I said, I updated the script yesterday and I broke it, didn't have time to troubleshoot it, but that's just one of the many smart responses you can have. We have smart responses that you can do with talking back to your Cisco products, right? You can go ahead and put things on a remediation network. You can do things like add these IP addresses to the checkpoint automatic block. You can do things like, hey, go look this up on VirusTotal. So we have quite a few automated responses that you can do. And obviously, we'd be more than happy to show you those in follow-ups to this webinar. So another cool alarm that I did fire on here, which I wanted you guys to see, and then I'm going to show you how I did that in network and network monitor, is this one, the WannaCry activity, right? It's an 83. It's pretty red. I also have set the same response to go ahead, so that's why you get that. But basically, when you click on WannaCry activity, we see that we have this host that was attempting to do communications with that host, and you want to see what the actual indicators of that are, you'd go ahead and you launch a search on it, and I would probably do this as well. I would go ahead and create a new case right away. This is part of the orchestration, right? Create a case, add the relevant details. I am going to leave it as a high. And once I've added the alarm, the case is created. It'll show up here in this tab that I have. And I'm going to go ahead and add a playbook, right? So orchestration is also about having a consistent way of repeating things with whether it's an investigation or whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and add a playbook here. And this is my home system. So I have, a couple of playbooks pre-installed. And once I add that playbook here, now I have 8 procedures that I need to follow as an analyst. Now, this may seem trivial to some people, but trust me, when you have a number of analysts or security teams, or perhaps you're the new guy on the security operations team, and something like this happens, having a playbook is a godsend. So you just have to go ahead and follow these things and check them off as you're doing. You can add your notes. And through the magic of time warping, we're moving really fast, and we got all this, and we've managed to do what we need to do. So I won't spend all my time showing you this, but you get the idea of the art of the possible. What is possible with NDR platform? So I am going to go ahead now and show you an actual NetMon sensor, what it looks like, what the GUI is used for, and how amazing it is to be able to see north-south lateral traffic, destination ports, applications that we've identified on the network, kind of a thing, and how easy it is to use that data. So this is one of the netmons. This is particularly my netmon here. So you are going to see more interesting traffic over here. The reason, again, I wanted to show you this guy because think of if you are in general pop in your corporate environment. You're probably going to see similar things. You may not see such a big jump in Xbox Live, one would hope, on your corporate network, right? But you certainly will see, you'll see some Reddit activity. You may see some FaceTime activity. You may see some app boxes. So just a whole lot of different things on your network, not just the traffic that is back office related. That's for that one I can show you here. This is the one in our demo environment. And as you can see, this one here has more of the back office type of things. So I'm going to go ahead and change the dashboard to go to a application exploration. I'm going to show you both. I'm going to show you mine. I'm going to show you our demo environment. And you're going to see the different types of data that you can see on both. And while that one's loading, one of the things that's very easy to do is, hey, I'm not interested in seeing the applications themselves. How about who's consuming the most, right? What applications are sucking up the most bandwidth, kind of a thing. And so we have, we've gone up to almost 8 gigs and at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we have a lot of ways to view that data. I can go ahead and slice it, and it'll go ahead and filter for that time frame there. And we'll see, hey, we've seen some pretty high peaks over here for box.net. That happens to be from my laptop if I wanted to take a look at that. Now, we don't crack encryption, but I can certainly tell you, hey, who's the IP address that is doing this? And that's my laptop. This is my work laptop. Mind you, it is encrypted, but look at all the metadata that we can still retrieve and send you. So think of this as way better than your typical NetFlow, right? NetFlow is not very good at giving you the applications themselves and a whole lot of other information. We still give you the basics, total kilobytes and everything else. So you have all this richness of information right here. If you wanted to add any of these fields to that, to the grid down here, you can just as easily say, hey, show me, I want to see the application path just in case. And you add that in here, and now you can see that right away. So very simple to use, very powerful. I know I keep repeating myself, don't I? So let me switch this over to destination ports. We talked about this. All right, destination port dashboard. And I'm going to change the time frame here too. We have several ways you can change the time frame, absolute, relative, or quick. I'm going to just switch it over to the last 24 hours. And this is a really good graph to watch. Imagine this is your corporate network, and you're seeing, hey, okay, so week 443, we got 205 different applications that are using 443. Okay, maybe that's not too bad. 80 different applications doing, 59 doing port 80, and then we see a lot of other, different unidentified ports, if you will, or unassigned ports. In my perspective, as long as these numbers are low, only 2 applications, but I'm still going to take a look at it, right? So for this particular port here, we see this destination port. We only have 2 applications. Well, what are those applications? Let me take a look and see. Maybe I can see what it is. And so we have some of it as UDP, some is unknown traffic, which means it's not classified just yet. Others is broadcast traffic. So you can see that you can see that information right away, and we see that we have a couple of basically my router doing all that communication, which is okay. It's expected, so that's nothing bad. So nothing to be alarmed about. But again, I can go back over here and say, hey, don't show me that. We don't want to see that port. Show me everything else. So yet another way that we can take the data and slice it and dice it and make it easy for you to take a look at. If you want to see, hey, what's this? Was this Google Gen? Who's doing that? Again, click into it and look at the data. Now, we're sending this data, by the way. We're sending all this via syslog to our LogRhythm NDR platform. So I'm switching over to configuration in here just to show you here real quick that we can do that. It doesn't just have to be used with our platform. It is a syslog feed, so you can send it to wherever you like to send that syslog feed.
Hey, by the way, got a few questions for you whenever you're ready.
Go ahead while I figure my password out.
Okay, Kelly says, And you know what? You better mute yourself just while I ask this question. In a PCI environment, do you get any pushback from QSAs on having packet capture capabilities enabled on an ongoing basis? We've been told packet capture should only be enabled for short-term troubleshooting. So there's one for you.
Okay, perfect question. So you're leading me right to where I was at, configuration of the product. So what we're sending is metadata, right? So all the metadata that I showed you is what we're sending to the SIM. If you have syslog enabled here, you don't even have to do that. You can just keep the metadata on the appliance itself, right? Or on the sensor itself. Now, if you're asking me about packet captures, we have what we call smart capture, right? So that means that we can do either a capture all with exceptions or a capture none, but capture none or capture only. And guess what? You don't have to have it on the entire time either. Packet captures, again, if it's most of the time, if we're doing capture all, we would probably put SSL to exclude, simply because, you know, it's encrypted. We can't crack it. So it's not going to help anybody unless we have a way of extracting it. So we don't need to capture that traffic, right? So anything else, we do have alarms that will address that particular issue, or at least give you some sort of visibility to, hey, is credit card information being sent in the clear in my environment? And that's where I came into here. These are flow rules that you can turn on, and right here, this one here, it's not turned on in my environment, but you can certainly turn it on if we detect credit card information sent as plain text or HTTP, FTP, or SMTP. So real easy to handle that one.
Hey, Frank asks, can you go back and re-show a port that was hidden?
A port that was hidden. I'm going to need a little more context on that one.
Yeah, Frank, maybe you can give us some more information on that one. And then the other one, related to DNS traffic, can we identify the source of DNS records getting registered in an AD DNS server in a heterogeneous network? That's a big one.
That's a mouthful, yeah. So I can show you what we can do with DNS just with NDR, but to do what you're asking, that would require creating a real-time alert within the LogRhythm platform, which comes with NDR, and to do that specific, that particular use case that you described. So let me show you what we can do with DNS. And for that, I'm going to switch over to Discover. So Discover is just basically all the metadata minus the graphs, right? And I can switch, I'm going to go ahead and switch over here to the last 24 hours, for example. Close this up, and pretty simply put, application DNS. Oops, let me mute myself. So what I did there, and I muted myself while I was typing because I think that was a little bit annoying, is I typed in, you know, where the application is DNS and where we have an actual query, and it's going in and searching back and presents me the results. Now, mind you, without the pretty graphs and everything else, kind of difficult to see, but I just wanted to show you, here's all the aggregated metadata that we can have, right? So one of the things that I can do is, hey, we want to see, you know, is there a server name that is associated with this? We go over here. Where is the name? Just put the application here. Family tag, that's the ID. Application, family, network service, and why don't I just show you one of these? So here we go, it's DNS, and this is the part of the host that did the request. Here's the name, and we see the query right here. All this information, it was an answer from a query. And I can just go down the list with picking out any one of these and taking a look one of those. Now you can also say, hey, for a particular system, right? So if I want to say and source IP. If that IP exists and fits that criteria, it'll go ahead and give me that information. So this didn't take very much at all for me to do. As you can see, pretty simple to run and do, and look at all the information that I get. The netmon host name, we see that was going LogRhythm.com. So it is my laptop, so that's to be expected. That's my the IP address for my laptop. So pretty simple to use. Lots of different visualizations for you to leverage. We have, for capturing packets, we can show you how the packets that we have here. You can download the packets, if you will. See where it says true, and you want to go ahead and download the packets, you can do that. We have tons of other dashboards that come with the product to help you keep an eye on things in your environment. There is a traffic direction table. Let's go ahead and move that to the dashboard area. We have an ingress and egress dashboard that I want to show you because I know Randy talked about that. So the reason I chose this for the last 24 hours here is because we can very quickly say, hey, we want to take a look at egress traffic, or perhaps we want to take a look at lateral traffic. We've been talking about that. This is what Network Monitor has detected as lateral. All I had to do was click on that, and we have a little bit of data down here. And as you can see, most of these systems, this is what we're seeing in terms of application. We're seeing some HTTP traffic, some bonjour or printer traffic, if you will, some session discovery protocol, sorry, your SMB traffic, nothing too terribly unusual about what we're seeing in lateral. Now, what I can also do is, if I don't want to take a look at that lateral, but I do want to take a look at, hey, I just want to look at my outbound, what's going outbound, or better yet, show me what's ingress. Okay, what's attempting to come in here and whatnot, or what are we seeing coming in? And boom, there you go. These are the applications that we're seeing coming back in, the hosts, and the data here on the bottom. Typical stuff you would see nowadays in any sort of work environment too. You see your Snapchat, you see your Instagram, and we're not cracking that encryption, but we are able to tell what application it is.
That's pretty cool that you can get that kind of data just from the metadata.
And we are purely metadata based. So, and we capture the packets as well, but the way to interact with this product is really with the metadata. I'm getting a pinging in my ear because I think my headset's about to die. Let me plug it in.
We're coming up on the bottom of the hour too, so if there's anything else specific that you really wanted to show, go ahead and do that, Luis. Otherwise, Doug says, he likes the key value pairs and the normalized and enhanced events.
Yes, and I'm going to do the one final thing is I'm going to switch back to my application exploration dashboard. And remember how I said I was going to show you how I did, or how we found WannaCry in our environment. So it's a simple, WannaCry leverages Eternal Blue exploit where it's SMB version 1, and there is a certain command string that is also observed. So it's as simple as typing this. So I reran in PCAP, and we're going to see right here where we see that it detected the SMB traffic. And why is this a bad thing? Well, it's version because it satisfies all of those conditions. We see that it's SMB v1. That one there is for wrong one. So we see, did I type this right? SMB v1 command string transaction 2. Yep. So here we see the host. Where is my 172? Here it is, the 172 host. This is a host that I know is not on my network, but we're seeing the traffic, NetBIOS SMB, that's a NotPetya, but we have transaction in the command string, and we see that we have a couple of things here that we need to take care of because this is probably not a good thing to have on your environment. This is an alarm that I can create out of this. And in the last 24 hours, if this were real, I would have hit 663 times. That is not a good thing. But by saying confirm, this will go ahead and watch. And in the alarms tab, we'll go ahead and show up whenever we see this, as well as send an alarm to your NDR platform like the one I showed you earlier on. And I believe that's about it for me. I know you guys want to see more, but if you do, we'd be more than happy to set up demos and help you out with learning more about LogRhythm. I do want to show you, we talked about smart responses. This is from our LogRhythm community site. These are some of the smart responses that we have. There's constantly more being added so that you can take automated responses when things happen. And this is our LogRhythm NDR page. So be sure to go ahead and take a look and come visit us over at LogRhythm.com.
Hey, thanks a lot, Luis, for doing this demo. It's a really neat technology, and also just thanks to you and the other folks at LogRhythm. You always sponsor such awesome topics. And in case people are interested in NDR, the best thing is just to go to that page, the NDR section at LogRhythm, and interface with sales.
Absolutely. That's the best way. You can go ahead and go to learn more. When you click on and learn more, it will have somebody contact you. The other one is there's constant, at least for my area, I don't know how many on here are from New York area, but in just about every area, there's usually some sort of an IT security type of event. We usually are there sponsoring as well, so come and talk to us there. We just went to RSA. Black Hat is coming up in a little while, so all those methods are more than welcome, or even LinkedIn.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye-bye for now.